people dropping by to talk about these really, really important issues. I guess it's like the media, right? So I'm not from America. I don't live in America, but I guess I'm just another foreigner doing the job that the American media doesn't want to do, or they're too scared to do because they're afraid of, I don't know, terrorism, I suppose, right? Lunatics like me. Okay, so let's look at this. Derek Chauvin may got off his murder charge, right? This is from Medium. Again, pretty important. We won't go through the whole thing, but this is pretty important stuff. And why is it not letting me interact with it? Let's find out, shall we? Okay, well, I'll try this one more time. Sorry, it's not letting me refresh browser when the scene becomes active. All right, we'll turn that off. Turn it on, turn it on. All right, interact. Yes, no? Oh, software. Oh, software. Okay, so I'll just bring it up elsewhere, and you can check it out in the links I'll put into the show. But so the World United graphic video of the white police officer George Floyd and so on, right? So here are the 6 important facts. George Floyd was experiencing cardiopulmonary and psychological distress minutes before he was placed on the ground, let alone had a knee to his neck. Okay? So of all the people who are saying, well, you know, he died from the knee to his neck, well, he was having this distress before he was placed on the ground, right? The Minneapolis Police Department, MPD, allows the use of neck restraints on suspects who actively resist arrest. And George Floyd actively resisted arrest on 2 occasions, including immediately prior to neck restraint being used. So that's important. And one of my big tweets over the last couple of days was basically, why the hell has this body cam video not been released? I mean, of all the things that needs to be released at the moment, I would put that one on the top 1 out of 1, right? Release that stuff. Now, is it because Ellison, the big fan of Antifa, does not want to release this stuff because it goes against the Marxist race baiting that is aiming to bring down the Republic and has been for the last century? So I think that if they release the camera, like the officer's camera, people will understand what happened, right? And then nobody will ever apologize, because who the hell apologizes these days anymore? It's crazy. It's crazy. All right. The Minneapolis Police Department allows the use of neck restraints on suspects who actively resist arrest, right? He did it 2 times. 3, the officers were recorded on their body cams assessing George Floyd as suffering from excited delirium syndrome, a condition which the MPD considers an extreme threat to both the officers and the suspect. Quite right. Quite right. It is a big problem. It's been tracked in law enforcement and other situations from the mid-19th century, like over 150 years ago, 170 years ago or so, right? And a white paper used by the MPD acknowledges that these excited delirium syndrome suspects may die irrespective of force involved. The officer's response to the situation was in line with MPD guidelines for excited delirium syndrome. I think that's a Victorian word for orgasm, perhaps. I know, arrived is a Victorian word for I've arrived. So restraining the suspect on his or her abdomen, a prone restraint, is a common tactic in these excited delirium syndrome situations. And the white paper used by the MPD instructs the officers to control the suspect until paramedics arrive. You understand? Restraining the suspect on his or her abdomen, a prone restraint, is a common tactic, and the white paper instructs the officers to control the suspect until paramedics arrive. And I'm sorry about my language, but to all the conservative assholes out there who jumped on the "it was just plain murder" bandwagon, you're the key reason the city's burned. You're the key reason people are getting killed. We know the left is always going to do this race-baiting garbage. We know that they're going to lie and they're going to misrepresent. But the blue line, or the thin blue line, or I guess the thin red line of the conservatives are supposed to push back on everyone. And listen, I said, hey, man, this is going to be hard to understand how this is good. But no, I didn't. To my credit, I did not rush to judgment. I looked for the alternative information. I put it out pretty early. But I got to tell you, it was pretty disgusting for me to watch a bunch of supposed conservatives and supposed police people just completely throwing these officers under the bus. Oh, it's straight up murder. And it's like, wait for the goddamn autopsy, you bunch of jackals. Jesus. Really, really important. It's when the mob is the most certain is exactly when you need to stand up against the mob and push back and tell them to F off. 5. Floyd's autopsy revealed a potentially lethal concoction of drugs, not just a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl, but also methamphetamine. Together with his history of drug abuse and 2 serious heart conditions, Floyd's condition was exceptionally and unusually fragile. 6. Chauvin's neck restraint is unlikely to have exerted a dangerous amount of force to Floyd's neck. Floyd is shown on video able to lift his head and neck, and a robust study on double knee restraints showed a median force exertion of approximately 105 pounds. 105 pounds. Now, I think this article goes off the rails. They say, let's be clear, the actions of Chauvin and the other officers were absolutely wrong. So after they just say exactly how they're in line with all the police recommendations, absolutely wrong. But so, I mean, that's just so you don't get was you get firebombed or something? So they were absolutely wrong, says the article, but they were also in line with MPD rules and procedures for the condition which they determined George Floyd was suffering from. An act that would normally be considered a clear and heinous abuse of force, such as a knee-to-neck restraint on a suspect suffering from pulmonary distress, can be legitimized if there are overriding concerns not known to bystanders but known to the officers. In the case of George Floyd, the overriding concern was that he was suffering from excited delirium syndrome, given a number of relevant facts known to the officers. This was not known to the bystanders, who only saw a man with pulmonary distress pinned down with a knee on his neck. While the officers may still be found guilty of manslaughter, the probability of a guilty verdict for the murder charge is low, and the public should be aware of this well in advance. So why are they guilty of manslaughter if they did what the white paper and what the training and what the manual recommends in these situations? Attorney General Keith Ellison has expressed how difficult the conviction will be. That's not good, right? Then he should have, I don't know what his authority is here. I'm no expert in it, but shouldn't he have told them not to overcharge them? So from the original government complaint, we know that George Floyd was falling to the ground and claiming he couldn't breathe while still standing up. From the 911 transcript, we know that George Floyd was acting drunk and not in control of himself before the police were called. The 911 caller is concerned that such an awfully drunk, that's a quote, awfully drunk man would attempt to operate a vehicle. I was talking about this in the past, right? This is the call. It says, someone comes our store and give us fake bills, and we realized it before he left the store, or we ran back inside. They were sitting on their car, and he's sitting on his car because he's awfully drunk and he's not in control of himself. He's not acting right. And he's not acting right, and he started to drive the car. I mean, what if he plowed into your child while he was stoned out of his gourd and driving, while panicked and frightened and upset and angry and freaking out, right? And I mean, this is so sad too. I mean, they said when the clerk from the store went out to him because he bought cigarettes with this still wet, dripping fake bill, and when the clerk went out, the clerk said to George Floyd, "Hey, man, just give us the cigarettes and just leave. Just give us the cigarettes back and leave." But no, makes that decision. I'm going to fight. I mean, who knows what decision capabilities he had at that particular time. Who knows what capabilities he had to even reason at that particular time. So the Minneapolis Police Department recognizes 2 types of resistance to arrest. Active resistance, defined as, quote, a response to police efforts to bring a person into custody or control for detainment or arrest. A subject engaged in active resistance when engaging in physical actions or verbal behavior reflecting an intention to make it more difficult for officers to achieve actual physical control. Right? So that's active resistance. Passive resistance, quote, A response to police efforts to bring a person into custody or control for detainment or arrest. This is behavior initiated by a subject when the subject does not comply with verbal or physical control efforts, yet the subject does not attempt to defeat an officer's control efforts. Right? So that's, I assume that's just called going rubber bones, as we used to call it when I was a kid, right? So what do you think? Is this active or passive resistance? Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that given that the entire police car was rocking back and forth with George Floyd's frantic efforts to get out of the car, so the MPD allows the use of force in action resistance. Relevantly, the MPD allows neck restraint. Sorry, just got a question from Discord. So, neck restraint. It is defined as, quote, non-deadly force option, defined as compressing one or both sides of a person's neck with an arm or leg without applying direct pressure to the trachea or airway, right front of the neck. Only sworn employees who have had training from the MPD training unit are authorized to use neck restraints. Now, as an 18-year veteran, I'm pretty sure that Chauvin would have had that kind of stuff, right? There are two types of neck restraint. What we are interested in is conscious neck restraint. This is defined as, quote, the subject is placed in a neck restraint with intent to control and not to render the subject unconscious by only applying light to moderate pressure. The conscious neck restraint may be used against a subject who is actively resisting. We know from the original government complaint that Floyd was actively resisting because they admitted as much. Quote, Mr. Floyd actively resisted being handcuffed. We also know from the original complaint that he resisted again, and I quote, the officers made several attempts to get Mr. Floyd in the backseat of Squad 320 from the driver's side. Mr. Floyd did not voluntarily get in the car and struggled with the officers by intentionally falling down, saying he was not going in the car and refusing to stand still. While standing outside the car, Mr. Floyd began saying and repeating that he could not breathe. The defendant went to the passenger side and tried to get Mr. Floyd into the car from that side, and Lane and Kang assisted. The defendant pulled Mr. Floyd out of the passenger side of the car at 8:38 p.m. Mr. Floyd went to the ground face down and still handcuffed. So the three officers were actually unable to physically keep him in the police car. The little video evidence we have, says the article, indicates that there was a struggle. The defendant pulled Mr. Floyd out of the passenger side of the squad car, quote, likely because they were unable to close the squad car door due to his resistance. So there are two cases of active resistance, apparently, immediately prior to the prone restraint. Neck restraint was permissible in order to control George Floyd. The MPD guideline is to use light to moderate force. An officer placing his knee on the suspect's neck does not mean he is exerting full force, and there is evidence that light to moderate pressure was used on Floyd. Given that Floyd was saying he couldn't breathe while resisting being placed in the police car, the officers could not reasonably believe that light to moderate pressure would cause his proclaimed symptoms. So we don't know why Minneapolis is refusing to release the officers' body cams at this moment, although I think it's because Keith Ellison, who held up the Antifa handbook with a big smile, doesn't want it to go out because it doesn't help his case. It doesn't help his case. The original page for the MPD detailing the use of force has been wiped. There's an archive that's hosted by, for some bizarre reason, the San Francisco Police Department. So we don't know how long that's going to last. So the excited delirium, I know it really does sound kind of Victorian, right? In 2018, the MPD published a report on the use of ketamine in excited delirium. Now, a white paper is an authoritative report. They attached the white paper because it was considered by the MPD the most authoritative document on excited delirium syndrome. So the Washington Post reports, because they're hosting the original government complaint, and the quote is, Officer Lane said, I'm worried about excited delirium or whatever. The defendant said, that's why we have him on his stomach. Right? So they're concerned about excited delirium, and you're supposed to keep people prone, and you have to use moderate force. You can use up to moderate force to do that. I don't know what's beyond moderate force, maybe deadly force, I don't know, right? But, so they were assessing this excited delirium. Were they right or not? They're not doctors, right? They're not doctors. 2 officers believed that he was experiencing excited delirium. The other 2 officers did not comment to the contrary. And George Floyd for sure had some symptoms of excited delirium. Nobody knows if he had all of them, but I mean, whoever has all of them, right? So this is whether or not, I really wish I could get this control here to let me show you the guy stuff. It's kind of not super helpful that I can't show you. I'm going to try. Let me try it one more time. Probably isn't going to work, but I don't know why it's not letting me scroll here. Yeah, it's not. It's just the mysteries of software for reasons. Every single one of these streaming software has some stupid issue or other, right? I mean, this one you can't scroll sometimes, and XSplit, my audio and video would drift apart. And anyway, so let me not complain about that, but get on with the situation here. Okay. So here are the symptoms. Did he have them? Sweating? Yes. Police non-compliance? Yes. Lack of tiring? Yes. Unusual strength? Who knows? We don't know. Pain tolerance? Who knows? Tachypnea? Don't know. Tactile hyperthermia? Don't know. Bizarre behavior generating calls to police? Well, yes. Suspected or known psychostimulant, drug, or alcohol intoxication? Yes. Erratic or violent behavior? There's a question mark here. I'd fall on the yes side, but that's just my opinion. Ongoing struggle despite futility? Yes. Yelling, shouting, guttural sounds? We don't know. Agitation? Yes. Inappropriately clothed? I don't know. Guy's 46 in a wife beater, but anyway. Mirror glass attraction? No idea. Suspected or known psychiatric illness? No. Failure to recognize or respond to police presence at the scene? Likely no. Some of these symptoms are only going to be discovered from the body cameras, and we don't know. I mean, did he have tactile hyperthermia? Well, you have to talk to the officers who actually touched his skin, right? We don't know. So the dangers of excited delirium are pretty significant, right? So this is really, really important. This explains why the officers responded in the way that they did. And here's the quote. Given the irrational and potentially violent, dangerous, and lethal behavior of an excited delirium subject, any law enforcement officer interaction with a person in this situation risks significant injury or death to either the law enforcement officer or the excited delirium subject who has a potentially lethal medical syndrome. This already challenging situation has the potential for intense public scrutiny coupled with the expectation of a perfect outcome. Anything less creates a situation of potential public outrage. Unfortunately, this dangerous medical situation makes perfect outcomes difficult in many circumstances. Excited delirium subjects, as a quote, are known to be irrational, often violent, and relatively impervious to pain. Unfortunately, almost everything taught to law enforcement officers about control of subjects relies on a suspect to either be rational, appropriate, or to comply with painful stimuli. Tools and tactics available to LEOs such as pepper spray, impact batons, joint lock maneuvers, punches and kicks, and ECDs, especially when used for pain compliance, that are traditionally effective in controlling resisting subjects are likely to be less effective on excited delirium subjects. The goals of LEOs in this situation should be to 1. Recognize possible excited delirium, contain the subject and call for EMS. What did they do? Well, they recognized possible excited delirium, they contained the subject, and they called for EMS. Done. 2. Take the subject into custody quickly, safely, and efficiently if necessary. And he was resisting arrest and fighting back, and the car's rocking back and forth, and he's a huge guy and all of that. So, yeah, they took him into custody quickly, safely, and efficiently. Certainly seemed to be pretty safe. He was not shot, and he didn't have an arm broken, and he didn't lose an eye, and he didn't, right? 3, then immediately turned the care of the subject over to EMS personnel when they arrive for treatment and transport to definitive medical care. Dear, oh dear. In those cases where a death occurs, another quote, while in custody, there is the additional difficulty of separating any potential contribution of control measures from the underlying pathology. For example, was death due to the police control tool or to positional asphyxia or from excited delirium or from an interplay of all these factors? Even in the situation where all caregivers agree that a patient is in an active delirious state, there is no proof of the most safe and effective control measure or therapy for what is most likely an extremely agitated patient. There are well-documented cases of excited delirium deaths with minimal restraint, such as handcuffs, without ECD use. This underscores that this is a potentially fatal syndrome in and of itself, sometimes reversible when expert medical treatment is immediately available. As noted earlier, the government complaint against Chauvin states that the officer suspected excited delirium. Lane asked, should we roll him on his side? And the defendant said, no, staying put where we got him. Officer Lane said, I'm worried about excited delirium or whatever. The defendant said, that's why we have him on his stomach. Two officers suspected this situation. Chauvin was restraining Floyd in this position because he suspected excited delirium. So Officer Lane says, I'm worried about excited delirium. Chauvin says, that's why we have him on his stomach. And remember, the two of the guys were total newbies. And he was the senior officer, right? Restraining an individual on his stomach is common in excited delirium encounters. It's called a prone restraint. It is often the recommended form of restraint until the officers can safely put the suspect in a different position. Quote, as mentioned before, people experiencing excited delirium are highly agitated, violent, and show signs of unexpected strength, so it is not surprising that most require physical restraint. The prone maximal restraint position, also known as hobble or hog tie, where the person's ankles and wrists are bound together behind their back, has been used extensively by field personnel. In far fewer cases, persons have been tied to a hospital gurney or manually held prone with knee pressure on the back of the neck, or the back or neck. Right? In far fewer cases, persons have been tied to a hospital gurney or manually held prone with knee pressure on the back or neck. 2 years ago, an Eighth Circuit ruled on a case involving both prone restraint and excited delirium, writing that officers are entitled to qualified immunity in cases involving prone restraint, specifically denying Fourth Amendment privileges against excessive force. And I quote, officers determined that keeping latent criminal or a suspected criminal in a prone position was best given his continued resistance, and Baker pressed Layton's shoulders to the ground while Groby held Layton's thighs. This court has not deemed prone restraint unconstitutional in and of itself the few times we have addressed the issue. Under these cases, there is no clearly established right against the use of prone restraints for a suspect who has been resisting. Now, these are things that I'm learning, and you're learning through me, and I'm learning through friends of mine who know this stuff. And it's, informational asymmetry, right? So the average person, myself included, of course, look at the arrest and the guy in the knee and the neck, I can't breathe, and it looks terrible, of course, right? And I do remember, I said very early on, I think in my first show, I said, look, come on. This guy is going to murder George Floyd right in front of everyone with cameras running, with his body cam running. I mean, come on. It's not how, if he wanted to kill someone, he would, cops can always get away with it, right? I mean, judges can always get away with it. Lawyers can always get away with it, probably, right? So he'd find some way to do it, but he wouldn't do it that way. It didn't make any sense. Didn't make any sense. So, journalists, the public, we're not that particularly versed in excited delirium syndrome, and we don't know what is excessive force in these situations. So the white paper, there is no proof of the most safe and effective control measure. One quote, any LEO interaction with a person in this situation risks significant injury or death. Come on. It's crazy. It's just crazy. There is in one example here of a past case, a man experiencing excited delirium, it took 4 officers to restrain him in a prone position until the EMT arrives. There's a more recent video. It takes 6 officers, a taser, and multiple batons to restrain the subject. Even with 6 officers restraining him, he is still able to get halfway up. At 6 minutes and 14 seconds in the video, a black police officer kicks the suspect near the head and then applies force near the suspect's neck. This is appropriate use of force, even though it appears unnecessary because the suspect was an extreme threat. This particular excited delirium suspect was able to cause facial injuries to the officers despite being overpowered 6-1. As the white paper notes, excited delirium suspects often, quote, show signs of unexpected strength, right? Unexpected strength. And